All right, here we are, as promised.
Yep, we're going to bring you a video today, a lesson. We're going to talk about contagions and the coronavirus. We're going to talk about it a little bit. And do you remember a question that Miles asked the last time we met about 4 weeks ago?
Yeah, last time we met, I asked you guys, how many think that the coronavirus will not affect you?
And remember what you guys said? Nobody. It's not going to affect me. Not at all. It won't affect us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? Y'all are out of school.
Yeah, here we are 4 weeks later, and what's happened?
Thousands of businesses closed. 700 and something thousand people infected. Things have really changed a lot since the last time we talked.
Social distancing and
self-quarantine.
Thousands.
And who would have expected this? But let's talk about a story. Let's talk about a story with these kids.
Yeah, a lot of the news you see, all these things that are contagious now. Well, they remind me of a story that we begin to read in the Gospels, several stories throughout the Gospels, and one described in Matthew chapter 8.
Yeah, and that's right after Jesus had the Sermon on the Mount. He starts coming down the mount, and people all around him following him. His disciples are with him. And all of a sudden, the first guy that he comes up on is a leper. Yeah, and leper. Do you guys remember the rules about a leper? Lepers couldn't be around their families. They had to live in leper colonies. You couldn't touch them. You couldn't go around them. They had to scream, unclean, unclean, if you came around them. So, Jesus comes up, this guy comes up and says, and behold, there came a leper. And the leper said, and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean.
Yeah, and so what Jesus does is he puts forth his hand. He touches him and says, I will. Be thou clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed.
Now think about all Jesus' friends and all these people that are following him. They know the laws.
Yep.
He touched a leper. You can't do that. He touched a leper. Now Jesus is unclean.
Right.
He's unclean. That's right. That's right. It's the law. I mean, these are Jewish laws that you cannot touch a leper. And yet here Jesus has done it. He's touched a leper. But it doesn't end there, does it?
No. Because as you continue through the gospel stories, like for instance in Luke chapter 8, so there's a godly man, and he comes up to Jesus, and he says, my 12-year-old daughter, well, she's very sick. She's dying. And he says, Master, she needs your help. Would you please come and help my daughter? And Jesus says, yeah, I will.
Yeah. Well, as he goes to this town, and it's really crowded. People are all around him. And a woman with an issue of blood reaches up and touches the hem of Jesus' garment. And he feels the healing power go out. He feels it go out. But now here another unclean person has touched Jesus.
Yeah, and he doesn't become unclean.
No.
She becomes clean. She's healed instantly. So there he goes, and he goes into the house now of this child that was sick. And unfortunately, by this time, the child is dead.
Yeah.
And so what does he do? Well, Luke tells us that he touches the child. And again, he doesn't become unclean, but she's raised from the dead.
Yeah, Jesus is, instead of their uncleanliness coming to Jesus, instead his holiness is making them whole. It's purifying them somehow. This has never been seen before. It's not happened like this before.
So why does the gospel writers tell us all these stories? Well, what you find is that these are really three categories of defilement. There's the idea of having leprosy or touching a leper that you can become defiled by.
That's right. Then the issue of blood. Someone has an issue of blood, you can't touch or be around them as well.
And of course, another way is defile yourself is by touching dead things, dead bodies, and that sort of thing. In fact, in Numbers chapter 5 and verse 2, this is what it says. It says, command the children of Israel that they be put out of the camp, every leper, everyone that has an issue, talking about issue of blood, and whosoever is defiled by the dead.
So this is one of their rules in Numbers. I mean, Jesus knew this rule. They all knew these rules. And Jesus is breaking all their rules. But it's not contaminating him. Somehow his holiness is making them whole.
So, Matthew gives us this first story of this guy with the skin disease. And he approaches, he kneels in front and says, Lord, if you will, make me clean. Now stop and think about that question.
Yeah. He knew that Jesus was capable of healing his disease. He had seen Jesus heal people. He had heard all these stories. He knew that Jesus could, but he didn't know if Jesus would be willing. Well, was Jesus willing?
Yeah, that's what the whole question is, whether Jesus would be willing to do that. And this is why Matthew highlights this moment. of Jesus touching.
Yeah, this is going to give us a deeper understanding of the Gospels and of Jesus and of holiness. We're going to get a lot better picture. It's like an onion you peel back and get deeper into the story. And we're going to go back a good piece to see what God's plan is.
So what do you think the Bible means about this word holiness?
Well, and the Western culture, us, basically, we think, a lot of people think it's morals. Like, okay, I've got to be a good person and I can approach God.
Well, it is certainly that, but isn't it something
more.
bigger than that?
It's a lot more than that we're overlooking. And there's something you have to realize about God's holiness. God's holiness is incredibly strong. It's not that God's going to just be mean to you and crush you if you try to approach Him without being clean. His holiness is so great. And, well, a good way to look at that would be to think about the sun.
Right.
The sun, I think we would agree, is a good thing. Life on earth, It lets plants grow so we can eat. It keeps us warm so we don't freeze. But if we would get in a rocket ship and try to fly to the sun, what would happen?
We'd be annihilated, right?
Because of its enormous power. Yeah.
So that's the idea. But you could take that metaphor even further. Because wouldn't the area around the sun be sort of considered to be holy?
Exactly. It would reach out. It reaches out further than just itself.
And the closer you get to the sun, the more intense it gets. And so you begin to see this idea of the uniqueness of the sun in relationship to God's holiness. It's very powerful. It's very good. It generates all of these good things, but it's also dangerous,
It's
right?
very powerful. Yeah, it's the power of God. Think about that. Created the whole everything. It's the power of God you're approaching. And it's all holy. It can't accept anything that's unclean. And there are stories in the Old Testament that talk about that. We could look at a few of them if you wanted to. Like Aaron's sons. Remember two of Aaron's sons? God starts to dwell in the tabernacle. They build a tabernacle, and the Holy of the Holies is where God dwells. Well, before you can go in, you have to go through all these rituals to cleanse yourself. Well, they're having a big celebration, and Aaron's two sons go in, and they're in the wrong attitude, and they run into the temple, the Holy of Holies, and they're killed by God's holiness.
Right. Not a good place to be. It's not because the holiness of God is bad.
It's so good.
But because it's so good.
It's so good.
Right. And so the very first time we see this paradox, of course, we talked about that, is Moses in the burning bush. And he does tell Moses to take off his shoes because he's standing on holy ground.
It's so powerful and so great. It's so good. That's just it. God's holiness is so good and so great it can't stand anything impure.
So one of the main places of God's holy presence is located in the center of the temple. This room called the Holy of Holies, right? That's the hot spot, the meeting place between heaven and earth, where you go to meet God.
To meet God. Yes. You had to be cleansed. Everything had to be just right to approach God. You had to be in the right state of mind, everything, to be able to approach God's holiness, or it would destroy you. So being morally pure won't do it. That's not enough. You have to go through all these rituals, and God had them all labeled and all laid out. You couldn't touch diseased skin, dead bodies, bodily fluids. And Christ knew all this. When He was healing these people, He knew all this. Yet something's changing.
Yeah.
Apparently something's changing here.
What was wrong was the idea of waltzing into God's holy presence in an impure state. Here you're waltzing into the holiness, to the author of life, with these ideas of death and disease and sickness. And so that's why God gave the Israelites very specific instructions of knowing when they were impure. And also the steps to take so that they can purify themselves, so that they can go back into the temple again.
That's right.
And that's really what the book of Leviticus is all about.
Yeah. But now let's go on past that. Let's go about 600 years past Moses, and let's talk about the prophet Isaiah.
Prophet named Isaiah, he has this crazy vision. He's in the temple. He's right in the midst of God's presence. And he's totally terrified. You know why?
Because he thinks he's going to die. He thinks he's going to be destroyed by God's holiness. He's terrified.
He knows the rules. He knows he's not supposed to be there.
Because he's not done any of the rituals to be there. He's not prepared to be there, but he sees this crazy creature.
He totally is terrified. The creature takes the tongs and he takes a coal right off the altar. This searing hot coal, and he's headed right for Isaiah. And Isaiah thinks, this is it.
He thinks it's over. Yeah, I'm a dead man. It's coming to kill me. It's all over for me.
In fact, he says that. I'm impure. I'm a man of unclean lips. I live amongst the people who are unclean.
And then something amazing happens. The seraphim touches it to his lips. And it says that your guilt is taken away and your sin is atoned for.
So this burning coal somehow makes Isaiah pure. And it's remarkable because normally if you touch something impure, it transfers that impurity to you.
That's right.
But in this case, this whole new idea, now this coal, this very pure object, it begins to touch Isaiah, and the pureness of that object transfers to him.
It makes him pure. It purifies him. And that's amazing because this has never been seen before.
No.
You know, Isaiah first thinks it's going to destroy him, but all of a sudden he has this vision and he writes it down in his book. It's going to happen.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. The implications of this are huge because if you do march forward, 700 years later, you begin to read the story like we just read. The story of God, how that God's holy presence, this powerful holiness is now embodied in a human, the person of Jesus Christ. And he claims that he's fulfilling all of these ancient prophecies, but in very surprising new ways.
Yeah, he's touching people that are unclean. Skin disease, issues of blood, dead people. He's touching them, and his holiness is cleansing them, just like in Isaiah's vision. This is what's happening now.
Yeah. So what you find then is like this unclean man who has a skin disease for however long. He was not able to come into the temple. He was not able to worship. He's cut off from his worshiping community, considered to be unclean, and here he comes. And what you would think would happen to this man, Jesus would become impure, the exact opposite happens.
Yeah.
His impurity is taken away. Jesus makes him clean. It's actually Jesus' holiness that becomes contagious.
That's right. Yeah, that transfers to man. It's like Jesus is the hot coal that purifies Isaiah. That is the symbol.
The corruption, it's not threatening to Jesus. He comes and with all his power, with all the authority, the uniqueness of God's holiness, he's speaking as God because he is God. Not just speaking for God, but to be the actual presence of God moving towards his people. And he's cleansing those who are riddled with that. Jesus is not intimidated. He extends his hand and says, I am not only able, but I am willing to do this. This is why he came. This is
his whole purpose. Yeah, it's to come and save us. And we can look and talk about the virus that's going around right now. You have 1 in 1,000 that's going to get the virus. Well, 1,000 of 1,000 people are lost and don't know Christ. Sinners. But Christ came so that we could know him through his holiness.
And in fact, that's really what the whole New Testament story is about, that God's holiness is now available. It's not limited to the temple anymore, but his holiness is contagious. It's spreading throughout the world, purifying, cleansing, forgiving all the sin-ridden people. Not only that, but we find that as followers of Jesus Christ, that God lives inside of us, and now that we are the temple.
Yeah, Jesus said it's like a living stream flowing out of him, coming out to us and flowing throughout the whole world, that we might all be saved and know Christ through him, through his holiness. And something real interesting about the blood, we talk about the blood a lot, but back in 1918 when the big virus went through, the Spanish flu, they came up with a cure. They would take people that had been cured and take their blood and give it to someone that was still sick. It would help cure them. They're starting to do that today with the coronavirus. Think about that, taking this person that was healed and using their blood to heal someone that's still sick. That's our salvation through Christ. Through his blood, we're made whole. Through his holiness.
So Jesus offers us a rescue. Through Jesus Christ, the power to cleanse us from all of our sins, his shed blood. That's what transforms us. That's what makes us into new creatures.
That's right.
And so whatever your story is, whatever you think that you cannot approach God because of your failure, whatever you're thinking about, it's not threatening to Jesus. We can come with the boldness and the confidence to know that Christ has lived the life we couldn't live. And he offers that life in exchange, a righteousness that is not our own, his righteousness. He offers that righteousness, and in its place he takes our sin, and he suffers and dies the death that we deserve. And he defeats our greatest enemy. Our greatest enemy is not a virus. Our greatest enemy is death. And Jesus defeats that in a resurrection. And so now that you, putting your trust and faith in the person of Jesus Christ, can come with the confidence and boldness to his throne and to experience and live out everything that Jesus said and did in the power of the resurrection. Because he has the desire.
That's right, to make us clean.
To make us clean.
That's what, he was asked, the leper said, if you be willing.
And he's willing.
And he's willing. That's right.
So, see you next time.
Thank you, guys. Be safe.